You have no idea. Welcome to Soul Food Coffee House on this last Wednesday night of the month of February. Actually, it's the last night of the month of February, Wednesday and otherwise. We are here to talk about the astrology of March 2018. It's been an interesting month, to say the least. And I think it will continue to be interesting. It seems like I've been saying that for a couple of years now or more, but I got to come up with a cleverer way to say it's going to be an interesting month. Before I jump into the actual month ahead, I wanted to spend a moment telling you about my India travels, just in a short paragraph, because they were extraordinary. Then I want to spend a moment talking about the last eclipse on February 15th, because what I said here, well, actually, I didn't say it here last month, because last month at this time I was in India, but I said it in my last month's report about the February 15th eclipse, and I want to mention a couple words on that. I want to mention a couple of words on my upcoming events, and then we will jump into the astrology of the month ahead. For those of you who don't want to listen to this portion, don't complain to me about it, just fast forward to where you need to. All right. However, you here are stuck. Okay, India. So I was at the 28th annual conference of a school called the Krishnamurti Institute of Astrology in Kolkata is what they say now, Kolkata. And this school is not a little insubstantial school. They've graduated over 20,000 astrology students through their entire program. It's a substantial institution. This, however, although it was a 28th annual conference, it was the second time they had a substantial number of Western astrologers to create a dialogue between the Eastern astrology tradition and the Western astrology. And when I say Western astrology, there were 75 speakers at this conference, and there were about 40 of them were from the West. And when I say the West, I mean South Africa, Turkey, Israel, Russia, Serbia, Slovakia, Norway, all over Europe, England, the United Kingdom, South America. There were astrologers there from Argentina and Chile, I believe, and Mexico, Canada, the United States, and so on. So it was quite a spread. Everyone who attended this conference, or everyone who spoke at the conference, had to submit a 3,000 to 5,000 word article on what they were talking about, which is a substantial article that was published in the conference proceedings. So the first day there, unbeknownst to me, they give an award for the best submitted article, and ta-da! So this is me tooting my own horn? Is that what you was that a thing? All right, so it's total surprise, and I was very honored and appreciative, and that was great. Second day of the conference, I gave my talk. It was like a TED conference, in as much as everyone on the entire program had a 30-minute talk to give. So as crazy as this sounds, I flew to India to give a 30-minute talk. I've done crazier things. My talk happened to have been scheduled during the full moon eclipse. And the eclipse was exact while I was at the podium. So I set my cell phone alarm to go off 1 minute before it was exact. Oh, we had a half an hour. It was about 20 minutes into my talk, my cell phone beeped, and I said in the middle of my presentation, we stopped this talk for the honoring of a celestial event, because at this moment the full moon eclipse is total, or will be, or it will be in less than a minute, and so we should observe a connection with it, and since we're not outside, we'll do it here. I put the microphone down, picked up my flute. Those many of you know I play flute, wooden flutes, Native American flute, and I played for about 2 minutes. All of my Western astrologer friends who were there in the audience went, "Oh, it's Rick, you know, he does stuff like that." The 1,000 or so Indian astrologers who were there, I think, were like, what the hell is he doing? But I gave my talk, and it went over well. My talk was about fate versus free will. And of course, going to India and talking about fate and free will was an interesting exercise unto itself. But I did that. Fine. Last day of the conference, we were all dressed in formal Indian garb. We actually were measured and they tailored stuff for us and we all appeared that way. And I never even realized this, but they give an award every year that they call the International Astrologer of the Year Award, which goes to the person who gave the best lecture of the 75 lectures. And lo and behold, I was a double gold medalist. Total shock, total surprise. Those of you who know me know I'm rarely at a loss for words. I was at a total loss for words. I was like, yeah. And the pomp and circumstance and the music and the trophy, and it was all rather surreal. I will put the video up on my Facebook page at some point in time over the next few days. But that was my India experience. I'm happy to be home, although I did immediately get the flu and have been pretty much house-ridden for the last couple of weeks. And it's a nasty one, and I'm happy to report that without a shot, I apparently have survived, although I have this. That. All right.
Hey, Rick.
Hey, what?
Where is your article? Is it posted on your site?
No, it's not. And I may need to get permission from them in order to do that, but I'll put that in the back of my head. At some point in time, the actual talk will be on YouTube also. They recorded the entire conference. So that was India. Okay, boom. Number 2, upcoming events, really quickly, just a couple. This is NORWAC month, the Northwest Astrology Conference. It is March 22nd through March 26th. And there are astrologer lecturers from all over the world. This is an amazing, fun end educational conference. How many people here have been to a NORWAC before? 1, 2, 3, few of you. It's down at SeaTac at the airport at the DoubleTree Suites. And you can go for the entire weekend or just for a day if you choose. Information is available online at norwac.net, NORWAC, N-O-R-W-A-C, the Northwest Astrology Conference.net. Second thing, UAC, the United Astrology Congress or Conference in Chicago, is the largest Western astrology conference. This is May 24th through the 29th, Memorial Day weekend. There are about 150 or so lecturers from all over the world. This will be a huge event. Anyone who's interested in astrology here or out there in cyberland, you can find out more by going to uacastrology.com, and the link will be there. And I don't even need to say more about it other than it is the mother of all astrology conferences. And if you're interested in astrology at all, this is a total mind blower because it is definitely the who's who of astrology, including the semi-formal banquet night where they have the Reggies, which is the astrology community's version of the Oscars. And the Reggies are the Regulus Awards. The Regulus is one of the 4 Persian watchers, fixed stars that denoted royalty, and the Regulus Awards are given for outstanding astrologers in education, public service, and so on. It's quite an evening. Next thing is my Brighton Bush Summer Retreat. That's July 29th through August 2nd. This is putting astrology to work in your life. I teach 2 workshops a year at Brighton Bush. It's a very magical place in Central Oregon in the old growth forest. I won't say a whole lot more about it now, but you can find out more by going to brightonbush.com. That's BREITEN BUSH, brightonbush.com. Totally magical place. This event always sells out. It's limited to about 25 students. It's a small group. We're going to do experiential work and astrodrama. We're going to have a lot of fun. You don't need to know a whole lot of astrology in order to participate. And that's this summer at Brighton Bush Hot Springs. And then the last thing I want to mention, maybe the most exciting of all these things, is it's my 6th or 7th, I can't remember, week-long retreat in Bali. And, I heard the ooh. Bali. Magical paradise on earth. Bali is my favorite place on the planet. It used to be Italy until I discovered Bali. I'll probably take some flack for that. But this is October 6th through October 14th, and the topic here is Think Cosmically, Act Locally. And again, it's about making astrology work for us in our lives. And you don't have, there'll be very beginners, intermediate students, and long-time, full-time practicing professionals. It's a mixed group, also limited to about 25 students. It also will likely fill up. And if you've never been to Bali, or if you've been to Bali, this is totally a magical place. A friend of mine has built a retreat center in the middle of the jungle, about 20 minutes to a half an hour from Ubud, which is the cultural capital, if you will, of Bali. There are events that we do together as a group that are very much local flavor. We do a full moon immersion at a holy springs at a temple, and then are blessed by the temple priest. It's a very magical early morning. There's a waterfall that's a holy waterfall that we hike down to and do an immersion there. There's plenty of shopping. In fact, people have paid for their trip in its entirety by doing Christmas shopping there. You go with an empty suitcase. If you have any questions or interest in Bali, number 1, I have some cards here that have a little more information on it. Number 2, give me a call, send me an email. I'd be happy to talk to any of you about it. All I can say is that it's magical and transformative. Boom. All right, done. Incidentally, the same workshop, the same retreat center, which is Heaven and Earth Workshops, puts the workshops on at this retreat center, is also doing a retreat in April on creating your own divinatory deck. And this is a combination of images and photographs and so on. And if any of you are interested in that, also go to Heaven and Earth Workshops. It should be a very interesting week. It's one of those weeks that I wish I had a week and a half off to go and do it, because it sounds like it's a lot of fun, or will be a lot of fun. All right, now, March. Oh, no, I have one other thing first, and that's clean up in February. Because last month, and I actually queued up the YouTube video, but I'm not going to play it. You can go find it. It's at about, it's not at about, it's at 1 hour and 6 minutes into the video. I'm talking about the Aquarius eclipse that was on the day after Valentine's Day, on February 15th, talking about the predominance of septiles, which are not a commonly used astrology aspect, because 7, sept, doesn't divide evenly into 12 signs. However, the seven-pointed star is magical in as much as it's fateful. Things are unnatural, supernatural, otherworldly, alien, ghosts, goblins, spirit guides. Fate comes crashing through like lightning from the other side. People who have really strong septile charts include people like David Bowie, like Michael Jackson, otherworldly like people. The World Trade Tower bombing, the first hit was a very heavily septile moment. They're not always bad. They can be, but they're very fateful. They're like stuff that comes through from other dimensions. Last month in my talk on February, I talked about how this February 15th eclipse, which would be for days before and after, because eclipses are not just on the day, they're around that time, and in fact can take weeks or even months for the energy to fully culminate. But I talked about how the February 15th eclipse was one of the most septiled astrology charts that I'd ever seen. And as such, we could expect something to come crashing through that would be very fateful and have a way greater impact than one would expect from an event like that. Like the World Trade Tower bombing. I mean, it was an important event, but it changed everything. And the Parkland shooting was within a day of that eclipse. And it was very much a septile event, not because it was a shooting. Unfortunately, they are way too common. And just to reveal my political bias, one of the most telling things, or things that I saw online this week that I thought about, was that if your kid comes home from school saying that kids beat him up with a stick, would you give sticks to everyone? Just a thought. Or would you just give them to the toughest kids who knew how to use the sticks? No, you'd take them away. All right, there, I've said it, it's out in the open. But regardless of what your politics are, the fact of the matter is that this event was other than normal. It was something that had, I look at septiles as, it's almost like pieces on a chessboard are moved around in other dimensions. And then something here happens, and all of this other stuff just comes through in that moment. And I think that's what we're seeing here, and this has certainly not played through yet, but it is there, and it is something that I spoke about in great detail last month. And again, if you're interested, go back and look at it. It's one of those things that the event, unfortunately, fulfills the imagery. All right. Now, we're no longer looking in the rearview mirror. We actually get to look out the windshield and see what's coming up. March. March. March is the month that is connected with Mars. It is the month that has the vernal or spring equinox here in the northern hemisphere. And of course, in the southern hemisphere, it's the opposite. It's the autumnal equinox. But from an astrological standpoint, the energy of the month of March has to do with planets moving from Pisces into Aries. And this will be part of our theme that we will talk about tonight. That'll be one theme. Another theme will be the infamous Mercury retrograde, Mercury retrograde, Mercury retrograde. Mercury turns retrograde on March 22nd. It's retrograde from March 22nd through April 15th. We'll have more to say on that in just a bit, and certainly more to say on that next month when we talk about April, because it'll be through the first part of April that retrograde will still be in effect. So the other thing about March, which is really bizarre, is that there's an event that happens in March that's twice in a blue moon. Now, you know the saying, once in a blue moon? Because blue moons are typically once every several years, and it's when there's 2 full moons in 1 month. So there was a blue moon in January, because there was a full moon at the first day and the last day of January. Well, March has a full moon the first day of March and the last day of March. And so it turns out that there are 2 out of 3 months, or 66% of the first few months of 2018 have blue moons in them. So it's this whole idea of the rarity of the blue moon is shot. Now, this is not an astrological phenomenon. It's a calendar thing. As an astrologer, I could care less whether that full moon falls on the last day of February or the first day of March. It's still a full moon. The full moons are still spaced about 28 days, 29 days apart. It's just because February is short and has 28 days, it missed the full moon at the beginning and it just missed it at the end. So it turns out that we have twice in a blue moon. All right. So now some astrology. So here we have a chart for March 1st, 2018. And on the 1st, we have the moon in Virgo just coming into full opposite the sun in Pisces. This actually is for noon. The actual full moon itself is at 4:51 p.m. And so if we were to move this ahead a few hours, we could see there it is right there. This is close enough, 12, 11, 11:28. That's close enough right there. That's 5 o'clock. But you can see that the moon in Pisces is opposite the sun in the moon in Virgo is opposite the sun in Pisces. Now, what's interesting here is not just that this is a full moon in Virgo. It's that we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 planets in Pisces. We have the sun, Neptune, Mercury, Venus, and Chiron, all in Pisces. Pisces is about dreams, imagination, fantasy. It's about the spiritual reality in which we are not separate from one another. And I talked quite a bit about Pisces last month. I'm not going to dig into it too deeply now, other than March opens with that moon in narrowing, specific, detailed-oriented Virgo that in a way gives us a perspective that enables us to see the spiritual piece from an objective and or from an analytical perspective. And I think that's the key to this particular full moon. However, there are a couple of things that are of interest and importance, and one of them is the fact that Venus at 23 Pisces and Mercury at 22 Pisces, coming toward that point tomorrow on the 2nd, that Venus and Mercury are harmonized or trine with Jupiter. Jupiter is the cosmic good guy. In traditional astrology, it's called the greater benefic. Venus is actually called the lesser benefic. And although a case can be made for the fact that Jupiter is greater because it's so big, and Venus is lesser because she's not as large, I think a case can also be made for a gender bias here, and that is Jupiter is king and Venus is just a girl. I didn't say that. Still a goddess in her own right, but the fact is that when Venus and Jupiter harmonize, trine with one another, this is pretty sweet because it increases the sensual, pleasurable, when I say sensual, I don't mean sexual, I mean of the senses. That Venus in Pisces in particular, where ego is dissolved, Venus likes being in Pisces. It's a sweet place for Venus. And when she harmonizes with Jupiter in intense Scorpio, I think that this is a very, it has a positive we can put a really positive spin on it. However, there is, as there often is in astrology and life, a caveat. And that is that with these two expansive, sweet, yummy, nice planets harmonizing with one another, we can easily take something too far. And so I think that's part of the job of the Virgo moon, to make sure that we bring things back to a common sense level. Virgo is earthy and practical and analytical. The other piece of this full moon is that the sun is forming a half square with Uranus. The sun, a half square. Now squares, any division of the circle by 2 is stressful or tense. An opposition is a circle divided in half, opposed, that's 180 degrees. A square is half of that, 90 degrees, and a half square or semi-square is 45 degrees. And we have the sun forming a half square with Uranus, which actually electrifies this aspect a bit more. So it's not all just Venus-Jupiter sweet. There's also a piece of this that has a sudden change, something unexpected, something comes through, and we may already be feeling that today on February 28th, since we're talking about the full moon tomorrow afternoon. You'll also notice here that the sun at 11 degrees of Pisces, Neptune, the planet of dreams, imagination, illusion, Neptune is at home in Pisces. The sun moves about a degree a day, which means that if, in fact, we move this chart a couple of days ahead, that it's actually on March 4th when it's exact, but on the 3rd and 4th, you can see that the sun actually catches up with and then moves past, right there, moves past Neptune. Once a year, the sun will line up with each of the slower moving planets. Neptune, dreams, imagination, spirituality, creative imagination. The sun is the vitalizing force. It's radiant, it's energizing, it's willful. And when the sun lines up with Neptune, this allows those dreams to come through. And in fact, this is also part of this whole part of the Pisces, part of the Virgo full moon is that it is opposed not only the sun, but it's also opposed Neptune. It's all within the mix. And so I think that we have the beginning of March is really about finding a higher level of spirituality to move to, so we don't just get caught up in the day-to-day events that are going on and continue to go on. Now, the other thing that happens on the 4th is that Mercury, which is the fastest moving of the regular planets, I say regular planets, I mean taking away the sun and the moon, the real planets, Mercury, Venus, Mars, Jupiter, Saturn, Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto. Mercury is the fastest moving, and as such, Mercury catches up with Venus also on the 4th. And Mercury is communication. Mercury is how we interact. Mercury is the word mercantile, which is an exchange of goods or money. So Mercury, communication, lining up with Venus, sweet, nice, love, says that the beginning of March also is an opportunity for us to say things sweetly. Now we have to be careful here, because this is the ability to use Mercury the trickster, mischievous Mercury, to do Venus charming. Venus is sweet. And so here, when Mercury lines up with Venus the beginning of March and is exact, on March 4th, that there is something here about needing to be careful about making sure that you understand what someone is saying, that you're not being misled by their charming nature, if you will. Now, because Mercury turns retrograde on the 22nd, Mercury actually has to slow down in order for it to look like it starts moving backwards. We'll talk more about Mercury retrograde in a moment. But I want you to think here that Mercury is moving faster than Venus. So Mercury, Venus. Mercury catches up to Venus, but then Mercury starts slowing down, ready to go retrograde, and Venus catches back up to Mercury. So we get two conjunctions of Mercury and Venus that may tie events together, the first one being on March 4th, and the second one being on March 19th, still a few days before Mercury turns retrograde. It's kind of a weird anomaly, the way this unfolds. And the odd thing is that once Mercury turns retrograde and backs away from Venus, when Mercury turns direct, it never quite catches up to Venus because Venus is so far ahead before in July Mercury turns retrograde again. And so there's something about that which happens on March 4th, or thereabouts, the 2nd, 3rd, 4th, 1st, 2nd, 3rd, 4th, 5th, in that range, and something that happens around the time that Mercury turns retrograde, closer to the 18th, 19th, but 20th, 21st, 22nd, those two periods in time are linked by Mercury, communication, Venus, love, Venus, money. We may learn things about money trails in politics. Who knows? We shall see. So this is an important piece here, the beginning of March. Then, now you'll notice that this alignment of Venus and of Mercury catching up to Venus, and Chiron is right in the mix. Chiron actually changes signs about every 4 years. You know, Chiron was discovered in 1977. It was at first thought to be a planet. Hold on one second. I'm not sure that this is recording. Yeah, it's recording. I get paranoid. I think about having to redo this at home at 4 in the morning. Okay, so Chiron was discovered in 1977, and at first it was thought to be a new planet, and then it was thought to be an asteroid, and then they realized, no, it was out past Saturn, it can't be an asteroid, maybe it's a comet, and then it was decided that it was a new class of planetoids that we refer to as centaurs, and there's about a dozen of them or more known now that are moving around between Saturn and Uranus. But Chiron is considered to be the wounded healer in mythology. He was a centaur, half horse, half human. And Chiron is related to the wounded feeling function. Chiron is related to that part of us that is human, that no amount of therapy, sex, drugs, rock and roll, meditation, yoga will fix. We all have some piece of ourselves that's just part of ourselves. As Ram Dass says, there's no neurosis that I had at the age of 16 that at the age of 70 I still don't have. It's just at 16 they crippled me, and at 70 they're like an old friend. You know, they're just part of who we are. But with this Mercury and Venus lining up with Chiron at the beginning of March, there's something here about honoring and recognizing that part of ourselves that are wounded. Now, this is not just a personal, individual thing. This also may be based upon what's going on politically and in Washington, D.C., and with the gun control and all of that. There may be something here, and certainly the Me Too movement. This may be something also not about individual forgiveness, but cultural. forgiveness, something about having to face our own shortcomings and be aware of them as part of the healing process. Incidentally, the actual conjunction of Mercury and Venus with Chiron is on March 4th. But then on March 13th, Mars squares Chiron, and on March 18th, the Sun comes and catches up with Chiron. So there's something about most of March, at least through the 18th or 20th or so, through the beginning of spring, where we are dealing in Pisces, the sign of intuition, the sign of spirituality, the sign of sensitivity, the sign of imagination. There's something here about having to go to those places where we are hurting, where we're wounded, where we feel victimized, where maybe even we have martyr-like concepts that we have to go down with whatever the big picture is. You know, there's something here about recovering some of that and about facing some of those issues, and we'll see how that plays out this month. But I think it's an important backdrop or theme for the month. So then you'll notice that Mercury is moving pretty quickly. Venus also moves fairly quickly, about a degree every day and a half. Mercury is moving about a degree a day, although Mercury is going to be slowing down because it turns retrograde. But you'll see that over the next couple of days that Mercury and Venus will move from Pisces into Aries. And here we see Mercury now moving ahead of the pack, and there by the 6th, it's actually on the it's on the 5th and on the 6th, when Mercury and Venus both move from Pisces into Aries. Now, Venus and Mercury are now ahead of the Sun, meaning that they will rise in the evening. Let me do this the other way around. Meaning that in the evening, the Sun will set, and then Mercury and Venus will be left in the sky, so they will appear as evening stars. In the morning, which is what this chart is, in the morning, the Sun will rise first, so that when Venus and Mars rise, you won't see them. Here's the deal, though. When Venus and Mars are out ahead of the Sun by sign, it's like they're the early warning. The Sun is in Pisces. Pisces is the last sign of winter. Meanwhile, on March... Meanwhile, now I'm going to have to listen to me to talk through one of these things. All right, we can do this. Thank you. Yay. Okay, so Pisces is the last sign of the zodiac. Aries is the new beginning. Aries is the first moment of spring. Aries is the creation. Aries is the first moment of any new cycle. When Venus and Mercury move into Aries, it's like our mind, our thoughts, Mercury, our desires, what we want, what we like, Venus, are already in spring, even though the Sun is still in Pisces, a winter sign. Now, seasons always mix up. We get one season, especially here in the Northwest, where it sometimes feels like it goes from autumn right into spring. But the fact is that when Venus and Mercury move into Aries on March 6th, we are likely to feel the buzz of spring more so than we have until then. This is an important setup for the sun's movement into Aries, which doesn't occur until March 20th, and that being the first day of spring, because the sun's movement into Aries every year, Aries is defined as the vernal equinox. That's what Aries is. Aries is, in Western astrology, Aries is the first sign because it is the beginning of the year of seasons here in the Northern Hemisphere. So Venus and Mercury moving into Aries is interesting because Mercury likes being in Aries, but Venus isn't quite sure. Venus is love. Venus is sweet. Venus is sensual. In Pisces, Venus is soft Angora fur. Venus is yummy. It's sensitive. It's sweet. In Aries, she trades her Angora sweater for some red leather. We have to be careful about making judgments. It's still Venus, but instead of being sensitive and responsive and dreamy and imaginative and spiritual, now she's hot to trot. And in Aries, there isn't the same sense of staying power or loyalty because Venus in Aries likes this now, and now likes this. Because Aries is a sense of urgency and immediacy. It's about being in the moment. It's about being spontaneous. And Venus in Aries is very much that need for adrenaline and excitement, a desire to be awakened by nice feelings. Venus in Aries certainly can be ardent in love, but she isn't necessarily boring, settled. Maybe even feminine in the classic sense of the word. Need to be careful here because she's no less feminine in whatever sign she's in. Venus is Venus. But Aries is a masculine sign, and I say masculine meaning not sex, not which sex organs one happens to have, but more an energetic yin-yang, receptive versus expressive, or expansive versus contractive. And Venus in Aries has a harder time, I think, showing up because of cultural, social judgments, and because it's just harder for her to find her place. Now, that having been said, she's still traveling hand in hand with Mercury. Mercury is the messenger. Mercury almost doesn't care what sign it's in because Mercury takes on the color of whatever sign it's in. That's not completely true. Mercury does have some places where it has a harder time being, but Aries isn't one of them. Because Mercury in Aries is the intellect and mind that can go there, wherever there is, absolutely instantaneously. Mercury has the ability to in Aries pick up new things immediately. There's no loyalty to the idea or truth of yesterday or or a minute ago. Mercury is in every moment new. It's a Zen beginner's mind, that ability to look at things anew. And so Mercury and Venus together moving into Aries is a statement. But we still have all this residual stuff hanging back in Pisces, which is still about belief and feelings and emotions and sensitivity and dreams and imagination. And it's not until the first moment of spring, we'll get there in a moment, when the sun moves into Aries, that we really get the second kick of all of that Aries energy. Also, right around the same time, on the 8th, Jupiter turns retrograde. The outer planets are retrograde for as much as almost a third of the year. and they move slowly. So when they turn retrograde, they're not quite as noticeable when a fast planet like Mercury turns retrograde. You know, Mercury is like driving in your car 40 miles an hour, slamming on the brake and going into reverse. You're going to know it. Whereas Jupiter might be moving forward at 1/4 mile an hour and then braking and going into reverse. Now, there's still a difference, but it's not nearly as severe a dramatic change, and so we don't quite notice it as much. And yet, it's still a powerful, almost like a bass note, where something is different, something changes, the energy of expansion, of opportunity, of opening up, of progress, the power that has been pushing forward now pulls back in and down. And it's Jupiter in Scorpio. I think Jupiter retrograde in Scorpio is more comfortable than Jupiter retrograding, let's say, in Sagittarius, where it wants to go outward. In Scorpio, it has a natural affinity toward emotions and going in and going down. So I think that this Jupiter retrograde that begins around the 8th of March and lasts all the way through the fall, I don't have the date off the top of my head, but through late summer anyhow, I think that we will see another round of all of these revelations around abuse of power, control, sexuality, money. I think these things that came into being when Jupiter moved into Scorpio back in October, and all of this stuff hit the news, again, with way more power than anyone would have anticipated. I think that Jupiter's retrograde kind of will be another layer of this stuff sinking in. It's not going away. That's the 8th. On the 10th, we have Mercury forming, I'm going to change my aspects here just to make this all look less noisy here just for a second. Simple. That's us. Simple. On the 10th, we have Mercury reaching 7 degrees of Aries, forming a square with Saturn. It just so happens that the moon is there that day also. This is a day of hitting the wall. This is a day of realizing where our thinking or our ideas or our planning, maybe we took on too much too fast, we got to pull in. We need to get real. Saturn, make it real. And it's Mercury, so it's our thoughts, it's our ideas, it's our planning. It's speaking the truth. It's being called out and needing to pull in and make it real. And it's followed up by just a day, by a couple of days later, actually on the 13th, when Venus catches up to the same spot and Venus squares Saturn. So we'll just bump that ahead there to the 12th, 13th, and there's Venus squaring Saturn. So from the, let's say, that whole period of time, from the 8th, 9th, 10th through the 13th, we're feeling that energy of Saturn. We're feeling the authority, the weight come down. And that's even added again by the fact that on March 14th, Jupiter, and I just took off all the extra lines, but on March 14th, Jupiter makes a half square to Saturn. And that half square, again, is very powerful because this is Jupiter expansive, but now retrograde pulling in, and Saturn saying enough. There's something here about the hammer coming down on authority, reality, law, karma even. And this March 14th Jupiter half square to Saturn is part of a longer process that began last year around Christmas, actually on December 22nd, and won't play through on its final until Jupiter turns direct again, and by September 3rd, Jupiter will align with with that Saturn. We'll semi-square, half-square that Saturn for the third and final time. So the mid-March flavor is very different than the beginning of March, which is, yes, opportunistic, expansive, it's going to be okay. By the middle of the month, we're going, oh, maybe not, you know, it's not so good. And good or bad is not quite the right word, but there's a heavier, more sobering thought around everything that's going down. And then on the 17th, we have the new moon. And let's get that a little bit closer. There we are, right there's close enough. And the actual new moon on March 17th is at 6 a.m. and that's Pacific, now daylight time, Pacific daylight time, 6:11 a.m. And this is a new moon in Pisces. And this, in a way, is Pisces' last stand, last gasp. It's like the fish are being forced onto land, and Pisces is underwater, and all of a sudden it's like that new moon in Pisces kind of it's a refresh, and it's an emotional, spiritual refresh, and yet it's like the last piece of it, because both the new moon and the sun are actually squaring Mars, and Mars is at the absolute last degree of Sagittarius. This is an unstable new moon. Everything's about to change. What's mostly about to change is the fact that over the next few days, well, later that day, the moon will move into Aries, just maybe, yeah, that same day, 27, 8, 9, about 7 hours after the moon will move into Aries. But then within a couple of days, by the 20th, the sun will move into Aries. And also here we have Mars moving into Capricorn later on the 17th, just a couple of hours, actually 9:40 a.m., just a few hours after the new moon. Now, Mars in Capricorn is an interesting thing because Mars is Aries' key planet, and we now have Mercury and Venus in Aries, with the moon moving into Aries after the new moon, and then the sun moving into just a few days later. And so we have all this Aries energy. Mars is in Sagittarius, another fire sign, going, yes, I can go there wherever it is. I don't care how far it is, I'll get there. But within just a few hours after that new moon, Mars moves into Capricorn, and Capricorn is related to Saturn, the wall. And in fact, over the days ahead, Mars will eventually catch up with Saturn, and it doesn't do that until the beginning of April, so I'm not allowed to talk about it because we're not kidding. But interestingly enough, you would think that Mars doesn't like being in Capricorn, because Mars is about pushing ahead. It's about forcing its way into the future. It's the god of war. It's the, you hit me, I'll hit back. You don't hit me, I might hit you anyhow, just to assert what my boundaries are. That's what Mars is. Now, it doesn't always have to be physical, but Mars is about creating boundaries and enforcing them. You would think that Mars might not like the restriction of Capricorn. However, Mars is considered in traditional astrology to be exalted, to be just fine. Mars likes being in Capricorn better than anywhere else. Why? Because when he starts something, he has the calculations and plan and determination to finish it. I often contend, if you have a physical project to do, let's say you're moving home from point A to point B, go through your list of friends, and instead of calling everybody and saying, can you help me, and getting 3 people to help, just call those who have Mars in Capricorn. Because if you have a bunch of people working, at 10 o'clock when it's time for coffee, everyone goes, oh my God, let's go get coffee. It's 10 o'clock. The Mars in Capricorn will say, bring me something back. I'm kind of like into working right now and I don't want to break my pace. Fine. At noon when everyone goes to lunch, the Mars in Capricorn will probably work through lunch and probably won't leave at the end of the day until the job is done. Mars in Capricorn wants to get to the top of the mountain because Capricorn wants the hierarchy and the status of reaching the top of being successful. Unlike the Mars in Sagittarius that goes, look, a top of a mountain, let's go. It doesn't give a shit as to whether it'll climb the mountain or not. It just wants to go toward it. That's Sagittarius versus Capricorn. So that when Mars moves into Capricorn, we really get that need to have finality and to get to where we are going. And yet, Mars is on a collision course, even though it takes a few weeks to get there. Mars is on a collision course and does eventually meet up with Saturn. And although Mars likes being in Capricorn, Mars doesn't like meeting up with Saturn because Saturn goes, whoa, I am the wall and you ain't going any further until you deal with me. So there is a bit of something real coming up when that Mars actually does reach Saturn. All right, so that takes us through the 18th. The Sun catches up with Chiron. We mentioned that earlier before. Oh, we're back here on hours. There we go. Before the Sun actually moves into Aries, it lines up with It lines up with Chiron. Again, another chance to face our wounds, to forgive. Often forgiveness is self-forgiveness. It's not just about forgiving someone else. But then on the 20th, it doesn't show here until, because I'm showing later in the morning, but on the 20th, the Sun moves from Pisces into Aries, and that is the first day of spring. And now the energy has shifted substantially because we're left with two slow-moving planets in Pisces, Neptune, who's there for 14 years, and Pisces, who's there for 4 years and will move out of Aries later this year. But now we have the Sun, Mercury, Venus, and Uranus. Uranus having been in Aries for 7 years, and it getting to the end of Aries, it actually moves into Taurus later on. We'll talk about that in a couple months. But we now have the predominant energy being Aries energy, and yet the first thing that the Sun runs into once it moves into Aries is it runs into a square with Mars. Now, this is interesting because Mars likes being in Capricorn because it likes the restraint of enough structure so that it knows that it's going to finish what it starts. The Sun, meanwhile, in Aries is saying, I don't give a crap about finishing anything. I want to start it now. I want to do it. And so we have this dilemma around the beginning of spring that's exact when the Sun squares Mars on March 24th. And that dilemma is about what I call the go, don't go dilemma. The do it, don't do it. The push forward, the listen to authority and hold back enough. And this becomes a dilemma for each of us to figure out how hard we should push forward on those things that we're doing versus pulling in enough to get something done, because often a bit of self-restraint is what we need in order to get to the end of something. It's not all we can push against something so hard that we exhaust ourselves because the time isn't right, and then as the time is right, we're so exhausted that we can't even push forward. So there's a bit of a dance there that happens towards the end of March. Now, let's just back up another day because in talking about Mars and this dilemma of whether to push forward or pull back, push forward toward the goal with an arduous, impulsive thrust, that would be the Mars and that would be the Aries, or to acknowledge Saturn, the structure, the reality, and to hold back. This same thing now is coming up as Mercury, having moved far enough ahead of the Sun, Mercury now looks like it stops in its tracks to begin going backwards. Now understand, and I've said this here many times before, that the planets don't actually go backwards. It's an optical illusion. And it's the same optical illusion that if you're in a car at a red light and there's a car right next to you and you take your foot off the gas and you just begin drifting forward just a little bit, you look out the window and it looks like the car next to you is going backwards. You've all had that experience. Or in a subway in a big city where the train you're in is moving, is moving past the train, not going as fast. And it's going forward, but you look out the window and it looks like it's going backwards. That's what retrogrades are. Retrogrades are when Mercury comes between the Earth and the Sun 3 times a year. The Earth is going around, the table is the Sun. I'm the Earth. I'm going around the Sun. Meanwhile, Mercury is going around the Sun faster, and 3 times a year, Mercury will catch up to me and will come between the Earth and the Sun. And as it does, it comes closer to Earth. And as it comes closer to Earth, like the car right next to us, we lose perspective and it looks like it's going backwards. The fact is that it really does, from Earth's point of view, look like it's tracing a path backwards in the sky, and therefore it is actually covering old territory. What this does is this creates a juxtaposition of timing. It creates an illusion that things are more important than they really are. I've often used the example of you've been thinking about buying a car, and one day Mercury turns retrograde, and you go, you know what, I'm going to go out and look for a car. And you're thinking, I really need a station wagon, something that can haul the dogs around and the kids or whatever. And you go out looking for a car, and the first thing you see is a purple Porsche. And you go, oh my God, I've always wanted a Porsche, and the price is really good, and you buy it. It's not that you've done anything wrong, it's just that you've not really thought things through. Mercury retrograde, you can read online stuff about Mercury retrograde that says, don't make any decisions, don't travel, don't sign any documents, don't buy anything, don't breathe. It's all bullshit. I mean, Mercury is retrograde for approximately 2¼ months a year. I mean, it goes retrograde 3 times a year for 3 weeks. That's 9 weeks a year when you shouldn't be doing anything. It's crazy. The fact is that if you sign a contract when Mercury is retrograde, it's a really good idea to read it. Because it's not that we do dumb stuff, it's that we do stuff without thinking that makes it dumb. We misunderstand. We turn left when we should turn right because we're panicking because we think we made an error already. The brain does become a bit muddled, but it's not because Mercury retrograde is bad. It's because Mercury is the planet of thinking, and when it turns retrograde, it's closer to Earth, which means that we're thinking louder. We're thinking more. There's more stuff going on in our head, and it's almost like rush hour. It doesn't fit on the road. It doesn't all fit through the little narrow wires, and therefore we can have a short circuit. And the truth is that the 2 largest internet stoppages that were large regional routers that have put whole areas of the country out for hours, the 2 largest of those in the last 20 years both happened on days when Mercury turned retrograde. I mean, there's something real here, but it in itself is a symptom of stuff. People say, well, I lost my entire hard drive. Well, that happens, but it wouldn't have been a disaster if you had your hard drive backed up. Or if you'd taken care of that noise in your car, you know, when your car was broken on the side of the road in sub-zero weather in the middle of the storm and it was a horrific experience. It wasn't that Mercury retrograde was bad, it was that you were stupid and not taking care of something when it first appeared as a symptom. Are you with me here? So Mercury does turn retrograde on the 22nd, but that doesn't mean that we should be panicking from the 22nd up through April 15th. What it means is that between now and the 22nd, we should be taking care of the communication shit that we've been putting off. We should be taking care of stuff on our computer. We should be working on writing, on studying, on getting our facts in order. We should be dealing with those things that are everyday routines to keep them up to date, rather than letting them pile up, so that when Mercury turns retrograde, those things that shouldn't be problematic will become short-circuited rush hour symptoms, and we'll have that flat tire because we've been driving on bald tires for the last 2 years or whatever. All right. March 22nd, Mercury turns retrograde. March 23rd and 24th, we have 2 squares. We already talked about the Sun square Mars on the 24th, but Venus squares Pluto on the 23rd, and that's right there in the mix. And it's actually Venus squares Pluto followed by Mercury square to Pluto, and the Mercury square to Pluto is, oh, it never happens because Mercury turns retrograde. It's so close. This is interesting, though, because the Venus actually does square Pluto, but Mercury comes right up to it and then backs away and then doesn't come up to that square again till almost better than 2 months later. Venus square Pluto, though, is again, it's about deep stuff from underneath that comes up. It isn't always easy, but it's profound. When Venus squares Pluto, when Venus makes any aspects to Pluto, this is always a good time to go reread the myth of Persephone. Persephone was the daughter of Ceres, the goddess of the fruit on earth. The word cereal comes from Ceres, the goddess of wheat and of the fruit. Persephone was her daughter, like a young Venus, in training to become a queen. She was a princess, waiting for Prince Charming to come. Prince Charming came, but it was Hades, or Pluto. Hades is Greek, Pluto is Latin. So the story is basically that Persephone was abducted by the Lord of the Underworld, the Dark Lord of the Shadows, Pluto, Darth Vader himself. Took Venus into the underworld and made Venus the queen of the underworld. And I don't want to spend too much time on the story, but when Venus squares Pluto, there's something here about love, Venus, becoming complicated, deep. You know, Eros isn't just the light, fluffy stuff on the top. Eros is also about dark Eros. And I think that when Venus squares Pluto, we see some of this, the underbelly, some of the shadow stuff. And this is a great time for shadow work, especially because the Sun is also squaring Mars. But we have to be careful that we don't turn our fear, that would be the Venus square Pluto, into anger. That would be the Sun square Mars. March 28th, we have now the planets moving toward, well, Venus in particular, moving toward the end of Aries. And on March 28th, Venus lines up with Uranus. Venus lines up with Uranus. And this is different than Venus squaring Pluto. That's hard and dark and deep. When Venus lines up with Uranus, Venus in Aries, I love the moment. I love the adrenaline. Venus, there's an attraction and a desire towards being hot right now. And when Venus lines up with Uranus, Uranus is the lightning striking. Venus lines up with Uranus, our desires can be revolutionary, out of the box. We're attracted to things and to people and to ideas that we aren't normally attracted to. Where we find ourselves in situations that are different and we're liking the difference. And it's neither good nor bad, but we need to pay attention to it because it's not necessarily useful to act on every desire we have, especially when it's Venus lining up with Uranus. I mean, this can be an amazing breakthrough, life-changing event, but it also can create problems. So we just have to be aware that for the day or two around the time when Venus is lining up with Uranus, that our desires are other than normal, which isn't necessarily bad. We just need to be aware. So that's on the 28th. In fact, it turns out that Venus lining up with Uranus, where we might do crazy shit, happens the day before the day that the Sun actually squares Saturn, which is the day we have to pay for the crazy shit we did yesterday. So it'll be interesting to watch. We will be here again on March 28th. That's a Wednesday. This will be the 29th. We'll be right in the middle of it. It'll be interesting to see what's going on, about what it is that's crazy that has already happened, and we may not have paid the price yet, because that may not come until Thursday or Friday, when the Sun actually squares Saturn. And we run into some other kind of stressful aspects that are minor aspects. But I think the last thing that's of importance here, the two last things, are that on the 30th, we actually have Venus changing signs into Taurus. And now Venus is far enough ahead that rather than just being in Aries, the first sign of spring, Taurus is the sign of the middle of spring. It's now, there's reality to spring. Things settle in. It's actually really nice. Although this would be a dumb prediction, it would be astrologically sensible for March 31st or 32nd to be much warmer and nicer than the weather has been for the days before and after, because as Venus moves into Taurus, it's getting a glimpse of the next part of the season. Venus also, though, more importantly, is at home in Taurus. Remember, in Aries, she was like a fish out of water. Well, that's a bad image, because she was in Pisces, where she was a fish in water, and then she was maybe a rutting mountain goat. That's bad too, because it's Capricorn. Anyhow, in Aries, Venus was very fiery and in the moment, but as she moves into Taurus, Venus's sign is Taurus, or we should say Taurus's key or ruling planet is Venus. And as such, when Venus moves into Taurus, she can go, she can slow down enough to enjoy the sweetness of the senses, of the taste, of the touch, of the smell, of the feelings. And so Venus in Taurus is very sweet and very yummy, and we have that going into April, and we'll talk more about that next month, but that's all on the very last day of the month, just prior to the full moon, which is later that day. And this would be the twice in a blue moon. Oh, we went a little bit too far. There it is, right. That's good enough, right there. The actual full moon is at 5:36 a.m. on March 31st. And this is a full moon in Libra. And this full moon in Libra is representative of the primal relationship. What do I mean by that? Aries is the first moment of every new cycle. As such, Aries is about I, me, mine. It's the infant baby who doesn't know that there's anything in the universe beyond its fingers and toes and self. It doesn't see itself as something separate from the universe like Leo does. It sees the entire universe as itself. And yet, in Libra, there's this balance between the self and the not self. And so the full moon in Libra, especially opposing not only the Sun, but the Sun and retrograde Mercury, there's this awareness of who am I in relationship to you, and you, and you, and that, and that, and this. Because there's this everything has a relationship from self to other, and that becomes apparent at this full moon. I don't think this is the easiest full moon, because we're still coming off of and have the Sun squaring Saturn. That was just a couple of days prior. I think that this full moon, in a way, is a culmination, as many full moons are, as all full moons are, of the awareness of how what I do fits into a larger scheme of things and is not separate from that. understanding here that Mercury is retrograde, and in summary, what we're really talking about this month is a lot of review, a lot of looking back, a lot of looking. It's not only about the squares to Saturn and the bumping into walls. The very beginning of the month, it looks like everything is cool, but then as Mercury slows down, begins to turn retrograde, as these planets square both Mars and Saturn from Aries, we kind of are aware that it's not only about us, it's about, or about me, or about any one of us individually, it's about how we relate to that greater whole, and I think that that becomes the key or underlying message of the month. So, thank you all for your indulgence, paying attention. I hope some of this makes sense to you. This is where you clap.